Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 8th episode of SCM Talk Show. So, as we plan, we plan to have this talk show every fortnight. Last one was quite a number of weeks back. It was on 11th November, in fact. And after that, we have had a big gap. That is because of Diwali holidays. And, I think the year end, a lot of speakers were busy during the weekend and their non-availability and so on. So I think today also we have got I think Mr. Sunil Bharadwaj with a lot of difficulty because this is also another year end in March. Hopefully the next one, that is we are planning on 10th of April. Probably the year end will be gone and we will have speakers available. So I think today's topic also has been chosen from the responses that we received, when we did a survey last year in 2020. And what we are going to do is, like all other old sessions that we have done, we are going to record this session also. Okay, and you will have the session available on Novux mobile app also and on the YouTube channel also. You are going to have in both the places. And for the convenience of everyone, we are going to put this, uh, you know, the session only in the listen only mode. So if you have any questions, you can please submit, in the chat box. We will take a few questions depending on the time availability and, number of people who have asked this question, how important it is. We will take the questions towards the end. So, you please keep on putting your questions in the chat box so that, we have this question before the end of the session and we are prepared to ask the question to the speaker. So let me begin. So this is a part of the logistics, but let me begin now. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Sunil Bharadwaj. And Sunil has a very strong capability in supply chain management, operations management. He's worked in various sectors like building materials, construction, FMCG, water and power, textile and apparel. So to talk about the organization that he worked with, he has worked with L&T, he worked with Wipro, Nitco, Pidilite, and he also had a stint in Saudi Arabia where he worked for Abu Nayan Holding. And till recently, he was in Raymond, so ex Raymond now. To give a little bit of his background, he did his MBA from SP Jain, and he is APIC CSCP and CLTD certified, which is a big feather in his cap. He is an occasional writer as well as speaker at the B schools and conferences. He's also spoken in North American and European conferences of APICS and IBF. IBF is Institute of Business Finance, Institute of Business Forecasting. He has published articles in APICS magazine as well as Journal of Business Forecasting. So welcome Sunil to this talk show. So today's topic is the modern material planning. And this is the biggest pain area of our industry. And not today, I think for decades and decades, it's been a pain, and this been, I think everybody is searching for solutions. And I'm sure all the audience will be most interested in listening to what Sunil has to say.
Yeah.
My first question is, please tell me how has the metal planning function evolved with respect to the VUCA world, which is what we are facing today?
Right. Right. First of all, thank you very much, Nitush and Ravi for this opportunity. I feel very privileged to be joining a list of wonderful speakers before me, highly experienced, knowledgeable people in their own right. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Great to be part of the first session of season 2 and to kick off episode 8 here. So thanks a lot. I think coming to your question now, I think it's very important to understand that whether we talk of the VUCA world or not, supply chain traditionally has been all about VUCA only. So whether we like it or not, traditionally operations and supply chain have been volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Right from the time I was a student. So nothing has changed. I mean, to that effect. But now to add to what has happened during COVID times and the way this whole function has evolved, I think a lot of existing processes, paradigms, procedures, and the things and the way it was looked at historically are now being re-looked at and sort of revalidated. So people in a sense are going back to the drawing board and they are trying to look at whether this whole function can be approached differently, whether from a people perspective or a process design perspective or a technology or a system perspective, because it has sort of thrown all existing, I would say, assumptions, scenarios, and all that we have learned straight out of the window, right? And then historically, supply chain operations is all about the 3 V's. So inherently, variability is a part of every system, okay, and we are always grappling with increasing the visibility across the chain and also the velocity of material flow. So I think even when you talk of the planning function, I think it has undergone a sea change in the way it is looked at in companies today. And I think Corona only reminded us that this function is so important and relevant. And I'm very glad to say that being a supply chain operations practitioner, I think we needed something like COVID and the VUCA world to tell us that look, supply chain is also an important function, and there are roles that master production schedulers and material planners have to play in a company, and they are as important as maybe finance, HR, sales, marketing, if not more. So that's my sense. And moreover, Ravi, to further add to this question, I think my response would be that of late I have been noticing that people are realizing that the planning function is not only about process adherence or merely doing S&OP, but it has also become highly analytical, highly mathematical, okay? And people are focused more on applying analytical tools, operations research tools, and focusing on trying out different models so that there is a science and a logic or a method to this madness, okay? And moreover, when we talk of material planning, I think it should not be restricted only to demand planning or supply planning. I think it is also planning of resources, it is planning of capacities, it is proper scheduling across the end-to-end chain, and it is also not only planning with regard to the upstream activities but also downstream activities. And constantly the endeavor of modern material planners has to they have to grapple with these 3 V's because they are counterbalancing forces. Because the moment you lower variability, visibility, velocity in the system increases, but that is easier said than done. Today, do material planners really have those capabilities, tools, okay, and everything at their wherewithal to really influence this function and try and be a strategic aid to all the other functions in an organization? So I think the role is still evolving. We are still learning, and there are no right or wrong answers here. But my sense is now it has become more, I would say, strategic in nature. It has become more numerical and mathematical in nature, okay? And people are going back to the drawing board and looking at the whole people orientation, people organization, processes and systems. But to come back to what I said earlier, I think VUCA is here to stay and it will exist forever in our function. So I have not, in my 18 years of experience, I have never seen a day or a month that has been without, one of the 4 VUCA alphabets. Okay, so that's the honest submission I want to make right at the start. Yes.
Absolutely, I agree, Sunil, and thank you very much for bringing very important points. I think this pandemic has thrown a lot of planning function assumptions and so on out of the window, and people are rethinking. That is exactly what you said, and it's become more data driven. And I think this has brought out the importance of supply chain professionals. And I think in India we have done a very good job. I think during the pandemic, all the essentials were there on the shelves. I don't think we never ran out of any, essentials. And that ship that is stuck in the Suez Canal, okay, that is also is become like a news for everyone.
Yes.
Which actually wouldn't have happened, without the importance of supply chain management. So that has become talk of everybody.
Absolutely.
So very key important, point that you have mentioned. And you also talked about S&OP. So let me connect you to the S&OP function. How it has changed and how it is changing the companies. Do you have any observations how S&OP is changing or changed?
I think that's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up so early into the discussion. See, because any commentary or any perspective sharing on the materials planning at large will not be possible without throwing some light on S&OP and IBP as they were. And traditionally, when I used to do, S&OP till recently or several years ago, I think it was more, a monthly, sort of an event. Okay. Now, what Corona and COVID has done, or what this so-called VUCA world has done, is that S&OP meetings now have become, more frequent. Okay. In some companies, I have seen meetings taking place, on a daily basis. In some companies, it's a structured weekly meeting. And, people are, I think, throwing more light on the issues at the market side. So they are, using concepts like, control towers and, visual dashboards and digital tools to understand what happened yesterday, what is the plan for today, and did we succeed in doing it? Okay, so that means now it has become virtually tactical. Okay, daily, weekly, hourly, and I think demand planners, master schedulers are also playing an integral role in the whole S&OP IBP. In the sense that now increasingly there is a talk about correlating operations metrics to financial metrics, because during this crisis we all saw that suddenly cash became king. So there was this perception that planners are only good with quantity and numbers, etc., but they don't see the the pricing game or the volume to value game. So what is the impact on the top line? What is the impact on the bottom line? What is the impact on days payables, receivables, inventory on hand, the cash to cash cycle, etc. So increasingly today I have seen there are a lot of what if tools, simulation tools, and a lot of robust S&OP tools which have come into the market and into play, which companies are using on a more frequent basis. And today it is not only S&OP. To my mind, it has now transformed into integrated business planning, because you have the finance function also playing a key role in these meetings, apart from, of course, all the other players. Okay, like operations, sales, marketing, okay, new product development, okay, the supply chain planning team, the procurement team. I think nowadays even the logistics and the warehousing teams are joining these meetings. See, because a planner's role, doesn't definitely end with just understanding what to produce and where to store it. But today, I think there are a lot of decisions around inventory placement also. Where to place the inventory, how much to place, when to place that inventory. And today there is a whole science of reverse logistics also. So in some way, planners are intrinsically getting connected to all elements of the chain, upstream, midstream, as well as downstream. Okay. And IBP meetings of late have become, very, very, I would say, very focused in nature. It is to address a specific pain point or a problem of a particular week or a particular day. Once that is addressed, you move on. So now I don't think organizations have those routine meetings. Of course, they continue, but it is not that you have to, stick around for 1 hour and go through a routine presentation. I think today the data crunching has become more dynamic, and everything is very situational, very focused on addressing a customer or a consumer pain point. Was there a back order? Did this material reach the particular entity on time? Okay, what was the exact planned fill rate, planned versus actual? What was the line and the case fill rate? Was that particular SKU made available on the shelf at the particular point of time? So I think people have now brought it down to these level of discussions, and they are not leaving it to the month end or to look at it by the time it is too late, because looking at past data is not going to help you really. So today people are focusing more on lead indicators, because lag indicators are not going to help you, correct? So S&OP IBP meetings today have become more tactical, more frequent. They are focusing on specific planning performance indicators. They are trying to address pain points through the use of various tools and technologies. I just named one, which is called a control tower, and I don't want to use the the software or the technical buzzwords here. The idea is a control tower gives you it's a visual tool which will help you to understand the health of your supply chain and where you stand in terms of your supply, inventory, and demand planning, and what are the issues you need to address. But the larger point I was trying to make, to summarize my answer again, is that the focus today is on understanding the financial impact of the operational decisions that are being made. Okay, so today a planner in the IBP meeting has also to think like an economist, like a pricing man. He has to understand that what is going to be the value impact of all these decisions on profitability, on cost, on top line, on bottom line. And he has to talk the language of finance today, which is why another tool which is now, or other subject which is evolving from material planning or in the larger realm of supply chain and operations, is supply chain finance. It has become a topic of great interest. And today everybody is of the opinion that material planners also need to understand the language of finance. And this should become and has become an integral part of all IBP meetings. So this is my view and perspective in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Sunil. So I think you brought very important points. So planning cannot be left to, once in a month kind of a situation. So that those days are gone. So I think planning needs to be a little bit more finer. I mean, there was I think a gap between, you are planning once a month, but you promise a date. So that itself, won't really match. Other thing you absolutely said about is the control tower and involvement of all business function. I think
Correct.
SNOP, if you really see what Tom Wallace, who's the father of SNOP.
Yes, the 5-step model. That's it.
Yeah, and Dick Ling. So they in fact talked about integration of all business function.
Correct.
But somehow it didn't happen somehow.
It did.
And I think it's brought back into focus by IBP. So thanks for bringing this point up. Now I would like to know what are some of the risks, factor which associated with planning function. There are a lot of risks are there.
Absolutely.
The plannings are not absolutely accurate, and so can you elaborate on some of the risk factors?
See, if you were to ask me this question again, I think it is a pretty comprehensive question, and I'll try my best to contextualize it or try to share my thoughts and views on this complex question. But as you rightly pointed out, Ravi, I think risk is inherent in any business process today. So whether you talk of material planning, demand planning, capacity planning, aggregate scheduling, or detailed scheduling, I think at every step along the way there are inherent risks. But of late, what has happened is that companies have begun to realize that now that COVID has struck us, now nothing worse can happen, correct? Because we didn't foresee this and it has now struck us, and now we are having to react, right? So what I have been noticing, or rather what I have been reading or listening to of late, is that there are a lot of these risk factors which have become very inherent to the whole planning cycle, correct? And as you rightly pointed out, see, historically, if you ask me today, the jury is out on this. I don't want to again now touch a very I would say a raw nerve here, but there is abundant knowledge, literature, and debate out there on whether forecasting itself is relevant today, right? Now, of course, there is a body of knowledge which says that forecasting, absolutely, I do realize it's essential to have tools, advanced tools, which will help you to manage your aggregate capacity planning, production planning, supplier management, etc. But there is a body of knowledge which also tells that is erroneous forecasting creating risks along the chain? Now, can we only blame the planner now for this? Who owns the forecast? No, these are questions I have tried to grapple with for a decade and a half or even more. I have never found an answer. Okay, so SNOP, IBP meetings are typical blame games. Okay, nobody wants to arrive at a common consensus or a number. And whenever there are potential risks, people are looking at scapegoats, right? So I think there is a need to have a more holistic enterprise risk management approach and understand that forecasts or planning systems are intrinsically prone to risks, right? Now, when I say risk, I'll give you an example. Now, for example, you under forecasted or over forecasted. Classic supply chain and operations theory, correct? That means the wrong inventory is lying in the wrong place. Okay, what was required to be sold, could not be sold due to some other delay. Okay, there was excess somewhere, there was shortage somewhere. Okay, your aggregate inventory, your aggregate forecast accuracy is at 98%. But moment you come down to your SKU location level, you are at 30%. Now, this is a truth that we have been grappling with throughout our careers. And again, I'm not trying to blame anyone, no right or wrong answers here, but we should understand that essentially a push-based system or a forecast comes with inventory risk, with carrying costs, with errors. And no matter what amount of science or logic or debate you bring in, or you use advanced tools and systems, okay, you also use probabilistic forecasting tools, but at the end of the day, you're only trying to bring in a little more certainty and reduce uncertainty, but VUCA will exist. So my sense is there are not only business risks, but there are also operational risks. Okay, now a business also at a very aggregate strategic level is taking a bet, right? That now in this COVID world, given the state of our GDP and the jobs and the economy, we will still grow at 2 to 3%. We are going to sell, say, 5 more brands and introduce another 1,000 SKUs this season, and we are going to make 500 crore. But that is again a bet, okay, based on some logic and reasoning. Now, based on that bet, it all translates to the lower level planning, right? All those aggregate values are then translated into specific quantities. But again, as a planner, do I really know that what I am doing is foolproof? Or is it going to completely, eliminate any sort of inventory risk or placement risk? My answer is no. I think the jury is out on this, and we all need to at least introspect and bring this to the drawing board and have discussions around, the limitations of a system or a tool, okay, and the assumptions that are being made in a particular model, okay, any mathematical model. I think we must appreciate and understand its applications in its entirety, okay, and not look at it in a very siloed approach. Because supply chain is like a balloon, right? You press one part of an inflated balloon, the other part gets deflated or inflated. So any pin that is pricked on a balloon, I think is going to, completely disturb the whole system, right? System nervousness. So these risks continue to exist. But only today, what I have been noticing in the last 6, 8, 9 months is that material planners are also exposed to a lot of risk management principles in theory, and they're trying to understand that how potential risk events, and their probability and severity of occurrence is going to have a bearing on their planning decisions and outcomes. So this in a nutshell is my viewpoint, okay, on risks.
Thank you so much, because if somebody could plan accurately, I think we'll call him God. So I think the planners invariably have some risks, and it's impossible, literally impossible to do an accurate planning. So that I think
absolutely I can't agree with you more. And
I think the accurate planning is
honest submissions I'm making again. I mean, being very honest here. So I really can't sugarcoat this answer. I mean, we live in this world, so we have to acknowledge these realities and facts and assumptions, and then try to do the best. Okay, given these circumstances.
Yeah. So I think what are the role and relevance of material planning techniques, various techniques, some which are here for many years and some which are evolving. And related to that, there are some software which work on the old techniques and new techniques. So what is the relevance of that, and what is the relevance of software?
See, I think thank you for these questions, because I think to take forward what I said in my previous response, I think one cannot undermine or underestimate the the role of automation tools or advanced techniques or software that we see in the market. But again, the challenge lies in choosing the right tool or technique that will solve my particular business pain point. Okay, see, because today, like it or not, again, I don't have the final word on this. There are many planners who are still doing their planning and scheduling on Excel. Okay, and then there is a group that does it through automated system driven tools, and there are backend algorithms, etc. But to again to go back to my example on forecasting, now we all understand that we have been taught historically that time series forecasting works well. What has happened in the past can be modeled into the future. But Corona and COVID and the VUCA world has again taught us that now what has happened in the past may not really happen into the future. So advanced time series modeling frameworks also may not work again, correct? So which is why today I think companies are trying to adopt analytics tools, operations research tools, okay, and various modeling tools, so that their forecasting system becomes more flexible. Okay, there are certain items which are forecasted, certain items and SKUs are kept out of the forecasting cycle deliberately, and they are put on an automated replenishment and distribution mechanism, okay, through pull-based systems, through lean, through TOC principles, etc. So my sense is it is a whole amalgamation of operations research tools, of data visualization tools, and forecasting models also. But again, the watchword here is that what applies to one company or one planning function may not apply to another company, because every company has its own set of problems, it has its own set of SKUs, it has its own product families and brands, it has its own market dynamics. In fact, no two companies even in one sector will have the same set of challenges. So unless we are going to take these things into account and understand that these tools and techniques are only as good as the people using them or the inherent processes that are robust and well designed, only then a tool can help you. Okay, and then again, now there are a lot of open source software also. So why should we only look at companies like the big names like SAP or ERP or Kinaxis or O9, etc. Correct? So my sense is that I'm not trying to pinpoint which software or tool or which one works better, but the idea is to at least have a thought process around what that particular tool is doing. Is it making my process more efficient? Is it saving time? Is it giving me fairly reliable outputs? Is the human intervention minimized? And is there a solid, robust backend algorithmic and scientific approach which, as practitioners, me and my team, we understand it in the first place? Because it's not fashionable because my competitor is using a tool, I'll also plug and play and use the tool. So I'm not trying to tell you that tools and softwares are not important. They have their own place. But it has to be looked at in a very, very holistic manner, so that it actually aids you in the end-to-end planning process. I think that would be my take and my approach to the role and relevance of tools and software in planning.
So thank you very much. I think what you rightly pointed out is techniques are more important, processes are more important, and then I think we need to look at the software. So software comes afterwards, and then
Correct.
you actually added one comment, this, which you said open software which are available.
Open source,
So open source, and we need not go
yes.
for, let's say, the big names. So I would ask you one question: when you are actually selecting any technology, software, so what are the major factors that you should consider? And apart from technology and software, you will require a lot of support and
Right.
knowledgeable, partner and so on. So how do you go about selecting technology and partner both?
Great. So Ravi, you have actually put me in a spot now, and I think we had a secret discussion saying that you will not ask me any questions out of the syllabus, but unfortunately this one is out of the syllabus. No, just on a lighter note, but yeah, I think you raised a very important point. In fact, throughout our careers, I think as practitioners, we all grapple with this decision of working with the right technology partner, okay, and choosing the the right software vendor, or the right I would say service provider, okay, to enable us to automate, digitalize, or to improve our processes. But what I found is, the first thing is to bring in someone who actually is willing to have initial discussions around the problem area, the pain point, and a person who understands how your data is organized and structured today. What are your master data elements? Okay, what are your intrinsic processes today in terms of data management, extraction, transformation, loading? Okay, how is the data managed? What is the quality of the data and completeness? Okay, because these things are overlooked, and quickly we want to arrive at a partner who can solve all these problems. But these, I would say, these are hygiene factors actually, because today a lot of transactional data gets generated even from ERP systems. But today, how much of it is really used for decision making or decision support? We don't know. Today, many ERP systems have their inherent reporting and analysis tools, but still, when you are going to undertake a project, you develop a lot of new reports, lot of Z reports in SAP, etc. Again, I'm not blaming anyone, but the bigger question to ask is, does this particular company or entity understand my pain point, and is this company or entity willing to walk through this journey with me, and are they willing to understand our situation, and do we have a mutual concurrency in terms of what is the issue that we are going to address? Sometimes you may, after a month or so, you may realize, no, this is not a system related issue, it's a people or a process issue. We don't need a vendor at all. Sometimes there could be an issue, yes, we really need automation, but what this vendor can do with me? And trust me again, every software vendor cannot do everything for you. So sometimes it may be a good idea to plug and play, to use a small vendor who's not well known, a startup, but who can come and solve the problem for you. So my sense is, it is not about having a big brand or a big name. At the end of the day, it is about the people who have to go through that change management, who have to be trained, who have to use that particular tool. And is that tool really translating into some sort of measurable business success? Because honestly, I haven't found an answer to what is your ROI on technology spends. I really don't have a formula. I don't have an answer. I'll be very blunt with you. But I can only assess it after the service provider and I, as a company, we have both burnt our hands. As long as both of us do it, not one of us, and we learn through the journey. Okay, and these are risky bets. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But I think both should have their skin in the game. And I think we must understand that there are a lot of people, process, data elements, change management elements, company culture elements, etc. that come into the picture. Okay, and people are used to using a particular tool or a software. Now suddenly something new is thrust upon them. So unless they are told the potential benefits, or how it is going to impact that particular planner's day-to-day work, and how does that translate into the larger strategic benefits for the company, I think a lot of time and effort has to be put into this. Okay, only then we come into the the delivery, project management, and the fees, and the number of people involved, how long it's going to take. Because in some companies this extends for years together. There are plugs, there are loopholes, again bandages, again plugs, people come, people go, and the software is still there, it is hardly being used, and people are moving back to their old ways of working. So my only sense is that I think it is a function of the company, the industry, the product landscape, and the willingness of a customer to wait Okay, so I think whole lot of factors that go into this decision making process, and again, no easy answers here and no straightforward approach. But I will start small, go with a very flexible player, and try and see whether I can do a pilot and learn from it, and then take a big bang approach. I think that is the approach that I will use.
Absolutely. So thank you so much. I think, I mean, that's very important. I think many of the companies have a lot of ERP software, but I think as you mentioned earlier also, people end up using Excels, and so we call it Excel hell. So that's quite common. So I think it's very important that we select the technology as well as the partner very carefully, very carefully, and see that our investment in technology has a great ROI. Now, related to that, so let me ask you, what are the challenges and opportunity in the which are emerging in metals management planning?
Right.
Why do you say that the software or the technology or the partner has to understand situation? So, what are the new challenges usually, typically in the industry, in the field of metal management and metals planning?
Correct. I think again a very valid question, because see, now to my mind, every challenge is also an opportunity. So if it is a challenge, it also opens doors in terms of opportunities and what can be done differently. So like I said, just a while ago, I think this is a good opportunity for for planners and for the whole planning function to go back to the drawing board and to reassess and relook at all their existing processes, their existing tools, existing frameworks, existing performance indicators, and to do a very dispassionate audit and a thorough assessment of where they stand today and what has happened due to COVID-19. And see, planning is like the nerve center or the heartbeat of any organization. I think without a centralized or a decentralized supply chain planning function, I mean nothing is going to work. I think this is the particular entity that creates, that connects the upstream with the downstream, right? So my sense is today opportunities have emerged in terms of careers. Opportunities have emerged in terms of exploring new tools, algorithms, etc. Opportunities have come in terms of completely relooking at the whole organization design of the company. So people now are looking at job descriptions very seriously. Okay, they are looking at potential skill sets very differently. I think what was valid till last year possibly is no longer valid anymore. And I think today there is a lot of emphasis on critical thinking, lot of emphasis on on soft skills. And today there is a lot of opportunity for talented material planners and schedulers to play this role of translating their analysis and conveying it to the top management in a very, I would say, digestible form which can be understood by everyone. Okay, and this should be completely bereft of big jargon, big buzzwords, etc. But end of the day, in an S&OP or IBP meeting or a performance review, as a planner today, you have the opportunity to really scale up. Okay, you are not just merely a person who is going to collate a forecast or okay. Now there's a lot more discussion around value addition, adding intelligence to the whole process. Okay, and having an important seat on the table, so that you are actually telling them that the decisions I and my team make today are going to be intrinsic or are intrinsically linked to the success of a company as a whole. Which is why I told you today, planners have to be as much adept with not only quantities and numbers of production units or inventory units or outcomes. They also have to understand the impact of pricing decisions. Okay, on value addition, on net realization, on profitability of a product. What happens to the long tail? Okay, what if this product is sold at a different price? Okay, what happens if the inventory classification of this product is changed? So today planners have got a big role to play even in new product development. So right from a time a product is thought of, it is designed, okay, and then it is brought to full scale production. So what is the role that you have to play? So now to again come back to the point you made. Now today, if I were to tell you, the challenge is something like Evergreen happening. There is a vessel Ever Given which is stuck now on Suez Canal and owned by Evergreen, and there are experts and dredgers and technical people who are trying to make the ship, bring it afloat again. And that's not happened. They say it will take weeks. And I believe the loss is about $400 million per hour. There are another 150 ships waiting on either side of the Mediterranean Sea. Some wanting to move from Asia to Europe, the other from Europe to Asia. Now, assume that as a planner, I have made all the decisions perfectly. Okay, this is the inventory that I'm going to import. This is what I'm going to produce. This is what I'm going to distribute. Now, imagine that a planner has got all these quantities on his platform and his sheet, but all the material is stuck in that consignment now on the ship. Now, what do? So these are challenges. But at the same time, at least it opens doors and at least it prompts us to think that, can I now really bring in risk variables and risk modeling into production planning, distribution planning, materials planning, inventory planning, aggregate planning today? Okay. Or should these two be treated as separate silos or in isolation? No. The answer is there is an opportunity to integrate risk management variables with planning variables today, so that the outcome becomes a little more robust. So this is my sense today. And Evergreen is staring at us in our face. Now, no model in the world could have predicted this, right? There are 50, 60 ships that, pass through that channel every day. And it has been happening. And they have a new channel that was constructed a few years back after spending billions of dollars. And today you have a, ship that is weighing 2 lakh tons and carrying 20,000 TEUs, and it is stuck there. Now, as a planner, what do? You learn something. It gives you a new perspective in life. You understand that this is what I could do. But the opportunity is tomorrow. Can we even model for those scenarios? That what if I plan for an imported consignment, and what if something goes wrong? So what is going to be the impact on my downstream, on customer service, on lost sales, etc. So again, coming back to the point I made earlier, can I have opportunities to think and design and create models where I can do what if analysis, scenario planning, or where I can link my operational decisions to financial outcomes? So Evergreen has again shown us that we are nothing in front of this big ship. Right? Everything goes out of the window, right? And now we are just mute spectators. And now what I read this morning is that it's going to take weeks. So I don't know what is going to be the further loss in terms of imports, exports, moving from Asia to Europe, etc. and on this corridor. And I think India has now decided to pin all its hope on the Cape of Good Hope, You pin your hope on the Cape of Good Hope. So we are all going to go via South Africa and then spend an extra 15, 18 days, and then we'll get the consignment. So what happens to the planning cycle? So my sense is there are challenges, there are opportunities for us to constantly learn. And I think as I speak, this science and this function is still evolving. Okay. So there is, no definitive answer, and certainly I don't have the last word, but all I'm trying to share with you is, my views and thoughts and perspectives on how situations beyond our control also have an impact on the planning function. So challenges present opportunities as well. They open new windows and possibilities. So if we can latch on to them, nothing like it. That's my view.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I think, as you rightly said, it's not possible to plan unforeseen situations. And I think, related to that, I think this COVID-19 has thrown the biggest, event, the biggest unforeseen event, which I think all of us could have ever thought about. It's not about a channel. It's not about a country or a particular, channel. It has blocked the whole world. So I think that is the biggest one. So, coming to this extreme level of disruption that has happened through COVID-19. So how COVID-19 has altered and shaped this critical function, supply chain function? Are there any key learnings from this disruption, this pandemic, and anything that you wish to highlight? Sunil, are you able to hear?
Yes,
Sunil, you're back.
I don't know. I think there is some, robotic process automation here, I guess. I think somebody is unmuting my system. I didn't even touch the screen. I don't know why it happened. Yeah. So I had to, log off and log in again. So I just got disconnected and then joined the link again. So thankfully it should work now. I don't know. Maybe there is some, special supply chain optimization at play here. Or I don't know. Maybe there is someone from the planner fraternity who has, suddenly, done something. Just joking. Yes, sir. Please.
Yeah. So actually, we left off, by saying, there is going to be more uncertainty. And I
Correct.
think we were talking about the ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal
Yes,
that we
yes.
were talking about.
And
So I
yeah,
think
just
I think in terms
correct.
of that, COVID-19 is, I think, the biggest disruption which has ever happened. I think for all planners and supply chain planners, there nothing can
Yes,
be much bigger than that. So are there any learning from that? Are there
yes.
any,
I think
has planning changed? This critical function has changed somehow?
see. See, my sense is today again. See, unfortunately, many planners and their teams are not going to be able to go back to their offices soon. Some are forced to do that, and as I speak, Mumbai and Maharashtra have seen a lot of cases. And to add to that, even the temperature has crossed 40 degrees. Yesterday and today. So, definitely, I think the situation is still tough as we speak. So, I think now the challenge has been to coordinate and work with the teams remotely, okay, and to speak a common language, to have more focused meetings like we are doing now on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or maybe Google, etc. And I think the challenge has been to have all these S&OP IBP meetings, product reviews, okay, and the weekly meetings, production meetings, etc. Now all these have moved online, and then you have all these sort of technical glitches also, okay, and then you have to also communicate and translate your thought process and speak a common language across the team, and then that has to be understood by the top executives as well. So I think that has become a challenge. But I think, having said that, the younger generation and the Gen Z, I think they are a lot more, I would say, tech savvy than me, at least. I think I also, I'm not that old though, but I do come from a little different generation. But having said that, I think it has fostered a lot of communication, knowledge sharing, collaboration and learning today. I think what we have all learned is there is a lot of transparency that has come into the picture. And today, a lot of questioning and debating is now happening online. But at the same time, people have also understood that planners have a very critical role to play when it comes to making supply chain and operations organizations more, I would say, agile, more flexible, okay, and more nimble, correct? And here planning has a role to play. Okay, so it is not only about your infrastructure or how your production facilities have been designed or how the processes have been designed, but I think the planning function also is playing its own part. I have learned this during this debacle, that they are playing their part in terms of making organizations more agile, responsive, and flexible. Okay, and this is where I come to the earlier point, that planners today are able to appreciate and understand the nuances of not only push-based systems, but they understand the concepts of the push-pull boundary, how it is moving closer to the consumer, how we can also apply, pull-based systems and paradigms for distribution planning and supply planning, etc. Correct? So I think there is a lot of communication, lot of trust built through online platforms, and lot of mutual learning, collaboration, and sharing. I think this has been the biggest change this function has ever had to see. And use of remote tools, okay, so that everybody is on the same page, all the assumptions and everything has been lined up, and you do a critical analysis of your most recent past performance and what is coming into the future. Okay, so I think we are all learning, and I've also become quite now friendly and familiar with these online platforms, but I was certainly not prepared for this. I think this was my Suez Canal moment, I guess. I mean, suddenly you see that your speakers have been muted, and you're grappling with again making yourself heard. So we have to live with this. I think, quote unquote, VUCA will live with us forever. So
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
Ravi,
Thank you
over to
so
you.
much. I
Yes,
think
Yeah,
VUCA is going to increase day by day. It's
it will
not going to
increase.
go down. It's not
Absolutely.
going.
I can agree with you more. I think we should become comfortable and learn to live with it now, right? Rather
Yeah,
than worrying about it or getting nervous, rather, I think we should just learn to live with it. VUCA is our friend.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yes,
So I
please.
think we have had a lot of discussion on the planning function and uncertainty and so on. So let me go to another segment about your personal career journey. So beginning with your school education, how did you end up being here where you are today, especially
I
in
think,
supply chain management?
yes, I think, till I was in class 8 or 9, I think I was a normal student. And I think by the time I reached class 10, 11, 12, there was a, affinity towards, maths and science. And, I scored good marks there. And I think that is when I felt that, I'm certainly not a, creative person, and, certainly not, good at, biological sciences, etc. So that is when, like, any other, I would say, normal Indian kid, I think I made that, decision to take up science, okay, higher secondary, and then, did well there, and then went on to do, engineering from NIT Jamshedpur. And in my first year, I chose electrical engineering. Okay. But then when I was exposed to certain subjects in the first year, I realized that, possibly electrical engineering is going to be a little difficult for me. Okay. Because I'm really not able to visualize, electric current and flux and all that. And I really don't know what all these people do together. And it's going to be quite a difficult thing for me. And the fact that I did well in my first year and got a good rank when I was in my engineering first year, I got a chance to change my branch. Okay. So that is when I made a switch from electrical to mechanical engineering. And that was a conscious call, of course, because I thought, mechanical engineers are as important as all other engineers, and they have a role to play in terms of, production, execution, okay, operations, etc. So that was a very rewarding 4 years. And after that, I started my career with L&T, where I was in the construction division and related to, plant and machinery, monitoring and, plant and machinery operations, etc. So that is when I felt that, I think now it will be worthwhile to get deeper and understand more about operations, management first to begin with. So that is when I then took a break from L&T after having worked for 5.5 years and made the switch to, SPJN, where I did a 2-year full-time program. And when I was studying operations, I could, correlate to what I've studied in the past. And, I thought it was like a natural fit. You see, it is like a, a BCom, MCom or a chartered accountant, getting into finance. Okay. Or, a fresher or a person who's fresh, from undergraduate course, they have an inkling more towards finance and marketing. Again, this is my observation. And by then I was already old enough to make a switch to, finance or marketing. So I thought, given my balding head and, I looked a little, sort of thick rimmed specs and all that, looked a little senior. So I thought it will be good to make a switch from the world of mechanical engineering and practical operations to studying operations management. And when I did that, I could then see the connect. Then I thought that it's worthwhile to make a career in supply chain management and operations, as it were. And through the course of my journey, I think I have had the good privilege and opportunity to work with, wonderful, colleagues, seniors, superiors, and worked in, diverse industries, in diverse functions in different countries also. So I think over the last 12, 15, 18, 19 years, I think it has only strengthened my belief that, this function and this domain, I think is very rewarding. And I definitely, now when I look back, I don't regret or repent on the decision which I made. Okay. And I'm very happy and, to be in front of you today and talking passionately about, the subject and the domain that I enjoy most. And thankfully, it all fell into place. Okay. And here again, this is not a formulaic journey that I've had. I think at different points in your life, you make these, decisions. And like I said, quote unquote, VUCA, risk management, they apply here as well. But thankfully, I have been able to, manage all of them and, do a decent job. So that's how I've landed where I am today.
Great, wonderful. So I would like to ask you one more question, how did certifications, training and on-the-job learning, help you where you are today?
Correct. So I think, the whole foundation is laid in your, high school, undergraduate studies and any postgraduate program that you take, because you're exposed to, many, nuances and facets of management as they apply to a business. And as I speak today, there is also this thought of being, a career specialist or a generalist. I think, there is a lot of weightage today for a lot of career generalist roles, people who get into strategy, play more general management roles. But I'm of the view that I think first it is better to deep dive into a particular function or domain and then get into a general management role, because then you have that appreciation of, different functions, departments, how they work with each other, and everything is interdisciplinary in that nature. Okay. So my sense is that you should first dabble into a particular function and then choose your career. But coming to your question on, yeah, the foundation was laid in class 10, 12, engineering, MBA, etc. But after that, I felt that there is also a need for a lot of on-the-job, learning, things that you learn, by doing actually. Okay, by working on a project. And suppose I worked on a lean project. Now there I understood how you actually measure takt time, how you drop a value stream map. Okay, and how you apply principles of operations excellence to a particular plant. Now these are things that you learn on the job. Then there is your training. Then there are professional certifications also which have their place in the sun. Now, I'm not trying to say that one is better than the other. Now, this is not a competition here. I think, but as you learn and as you grow in your career, and you can learn from various sources. So my sense is each one of them has been accretive. That means they have all added to my collective knowledge. and wisdom today in terms of what I have learned or what I've done in organizations. So I think it has been a combination of my foundational learning as well as, I would say, on the job training, as well as certifications from APICS, which also helped me further understand how certain terms and technologies are standard and how they add to the larger simplification and standardization of the supply chain language which is spoken in a company, okay, and the literature. So when I used to talk to my team members, I would explain a concept to them, what it means, and that it is merely not jargon for the sake of using it. So if I have understood it well, then I can explain it well to someone else. So my sense is all these learning approaches have been accretive layers for me. My fundamental training, okay, the on-the-job learning, and the certifications. And as I speak to you, I am still learning from all these experiences, okay, and through this talk show. So I am still a student of supply chain operations and logistics, okay, and it has been a very rewarding journey. Certifications have had their role to play, on the job learnings have had their own role to play, my foundational learning have had their own role to play. So I will see it as very integrative and accretive. That's my honest submission.
So in addition to all these that you have said, about your education, about certification, on the job, do you have from top of your head any events or experiences that also helped you shape your career?
I think very early in my career, I think since childhood I was quite talkative. I think that is evident now from the last 57 minutes, right? I think you would have also understood that. And I think, that is something that, occurred to my first boss actually when I started my career. And very early on, when I was in my early 20s, he would give me opportunities to, to go and talk to gatherings, to, make presentations, to prepare presentations, to address a diverse audience. So that was sort of a game changer for me, because as a kid, I was quite, I had a lot of stage fear. I was very nervous to go and talk to people. Okay, engineering days, I started opening up a little more, participating in extempores and elocutions and events, etc. Right, but my first job, I think that is what was a game changer for me. And those events, I think, have largely shaped my professional career. So after that, I felt that it is incumbent upon me also, being a leader, to have this, I would say, I would not call it an ability, but I have this temptation and drive to talk to people, to give them some guidance tips, to coach them, to guide them, to mentor them. And I feel that has a big role to play in shaping one's career. And I think in subsequent organizations I have been doing that, and that also helped me to become a speaker at conferences in India and abroad, okay, to share my knowledge and learnings, to become a member of professional bodies, okay, and to interact with a lot of business school students, young aspirants, because I am also mentor with an edtech startup. So there I've been interacting with a lot of newer IIMs and other B school students to shape their careers and give them my piece of advice actually. So I think that one event at the start of my career built in a lot of confidence, and it also shaped my career in the sense that I was able to use my domain skills to good effect. And through all these platforms, I've had the good fortune of sharing my thoughts, perspectives, and knowledge. And I think these two have fitted in very nicely, because supply chain operations is something I'm passionate about, and the fact that I am also getting opportunities to address gatherings through various fora and mediums has really been the icing on the cake for me. So I think in terms of career and life-changing events, I think, yes, I would say the ability and that inner drive to make that difference through conversations has been something very, I would say, special in my career, and I hope to continue to do it.
So now, having gone through such a illustrious career, do you have some advice for our listeners, how they can accelerate their career growth, and
Right.
do you have some advice for them?
Certainly, I think like I told you, I shared my own experiences and journey. I think no two people will have the same journey and experiences, and I think we all need to, as youngsters and budding professionals, I think you must trust your instinct, okay, and please don't be afraid to take risks and fail. Okay, my other advice to be to you would be, please try and keep learning, upskilling, reskilling, etc. And please have 2 or 3 good mentors or advisors around you, because when I started off, possibly decade and a half back, I think the culture wasn't there of having mentors, etc. So I think it's always good to, have a person with whom you can, open up, with whom you can interact. Okay, have personal, professional, other intellectual discussions, etc. Okay, so that it really shapes your personality and your career, and it helps you through periods when you're not feeling good. Okay, when you're, down in the trenches and down in the dumps, and the times around us are still not good. Actually, as I speak. Okay, so there are issues, there are difficulties. The job market has been affected, and I know as young professionals, you may not get the, job in the profile or the role that you want. But I think, there are no shortcuts, to focusing on foundations, fundamental principles of all the subjects. Okay, and it's always good to be well prepared, keep your eyes and ears open. Okay, and I think the biggest thing is network. I think there's no shortcut there. I've also learned it the hard way. I was never so active, on LinkedIn, etc. I'm not on any other social media platform. But my sense is, you interact and communicate with people outside of your domain also. Okay, so that also gives you a very, holistic and a very enriching and different perspective. Correct. So my sense is that, take risks and be flexible, and never be, afraid to ask questions. Okay, and look for a mentor. And early in your career, I think it's a good idea to be flexible. Okay, don't be too fixated on a particular company or a particular domain or a particular function. I think it's always good to get a very holistic view of the business first, and then how it applies to your particular domain. So I think these are things that if I were to go back a few years back, and if I were to do things differently, I would have done this. And all of you youngsters are very tech savvy, Gen Z. Okay, you all are technologically very sound, way more than I am, way more than I am. Okay, so I think it's good to use all these platforms to your benefit, and I think it's always good to explore and learn things as they come. I mean, don't try to be too fixated or work in watertight compartments that if this does not work, I have no alternative. So I think it's always good to have a very open, flexible mind, a learner's mindset. I think I'm still a student of supply chain. I don't claim to be an expert or know it all. Okay, through this discussion, all I've tried to do is to share my views, perspectives, and thoughts through my prism and my journey and my experience. Right. So that would be my 2 cents of advice to budding professionals and youngsters who want to aspire or who are looking for a career in this field. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sunil. So we have some questions from listeners. I think so. I will hand over to Nistush. So he will take the questions which listeners have posted.
Thank you, Ravi. Privilege and pleasure talking to you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Same here. Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much, Sunil sir, for such a lively discussion. I would say excellent, lively. It was I think one of the most liveliest SCM talk shows that we are having. All the examples that you quoted about the balloon and then how Corona requires the SCM importance have been really interesting. So I'll start with the questions that we have got. So I'll start with the first question that we received from Miss Shweta. So she asked, can you please share more insight on the VUCA term?
On the VUCA term?
VUCA actually. VUCA.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for this question. I think VUCA is it comprises 4 alphabets, and it's an acronym for words which are not I would say very suitable or pleasant in the times that we live in. So V stands for volatility, U stands for uncertainty, C stands for complexity, and A stands for ambiguity. Right. So essentially, in a nutshell, what the VUCA world is trying to tell us is that whether it's our career or professional lives or the planning domain that we are discussing about today, I think right from the day we step into a company as professionals or as mid-level or senior professionals, I think every decision that we take or every process that we follow or every tool or system that we use has to be intrinsically seen from this prism, okay, or from this light, which is VUCA. Because no matter what you do, like I've been stressing, when I was responding to Ravi's questions, I kept saying that VUCA in some sense is a reality around us. Okay, we need to accept that there is going to be volatility. Forecast is never perfect. Okay, demand is always volatile. Okay, the marketplace that we deal in as a company, situations are going to become uncertain. We don't know what is going to hit us, right? Now, what has happened in the Suez Canal is a classic case of uncertainty. Nobody saw it coming, right? Correct? Complexity. Now, supply chains and operations by their very nature are tremendously interconnected, integrated, geographically diverse and complex systems. Today, modern supply chains are no longer linear. They don't follow the classic normal distribution curve. Today, every distribution is non-normal today. Every planning paradigm you talk about is not A plus B is equal to C. Today, all problems are interlinked and of a higher order, correct? So that is about the complexity of the interconnected systems, the planning systems, the capacity systems, the supplier systems, the production systems, okay, all the upstream and the downstream systems. Then ambiguity. Now, any decision you take has to be done with the underlying philosophy or the baseline that it is going to be ambiguous, correct? There is going to be some inherent ambiguity. Like Ravi just said, no forecast can be 100% perfect. Okay, no inventory can be always sold at the full price. Now, till recently, I was in an industry where you plan to sell all your, fashion merchandise and textile at full price, but you will never achieve 100% full price sell through. I till recently was in an industry where you have to sell merchandise with a markdown or at a discount. So that ambiguity is going to be there, right? So in a nutshell, in business paradigms or in general in life, I think VUCA is going to stay with us. We only have to understand how to manage it and how to counter it, right? That will be my, I would say, I don't know, short or long answer, but
no, excellent answer. I think that surely solves the issue. So there was one more question on right now. Can you explain the meaning of VUCA? I think that question is also answered with this. So we'll go to the next question. This is by Mr. Satish, and based on this question, actually, I would say rest of the questions follow up based on this. So, Mr. Satish asks that what is the forecasting accuracy average in the industry? So, before you take that question, I had actually replied to them in the chat that according to me, what from the knowledge that I have, it's about 50 to 60% forecast accuracy in the industry, and that's what I replied. You can take ahead now.
Okay. Thanks for asking that question, Satish. I think again, when you ask this question, I think I'll have to frame it and contextualize it. See, because now, no two industries will have, the same, level of accuracy, number one. And number two, more than, my opinion here is that in this subject is that instead of having a precise number on accuracy, can we work inside an acceptable range? Okay. So for some company with 100 SKUs, a 60 to 65% gross level accuracy may not be good. Okay, because they have fewer SKUs to deal with. They are working in a very specialized market. So they would like to have a much higher level of accuracy, correct? But another company in the same industry who has 50 markets, 10 brands and 5,000 SKUs is obviously going to deal with a very long tail. Okay, that is items which are really not going to contribute to your sales, etc., but which are still forecasted, correct? So there, an accuracy of even 60-65% could be okay. This is just to give you a quick answer, but again, one cannot answer this in terms of numbers, because again, I told you, for companies, aggregate forecasts generally by their science and design are always largely accurate, right? I said I will do a turnover of 50 crore in the month of April. Okay, I did a turnover of 49.5 crore. I am close to 100% accurate, right? But the devil lies in the detail. Now, moment you come lower down, right, in terms of level of disaggregation, that is when you will start seeing the gaps. That what is the accuracy at a product group or a family level? What is the accuracy at an SKU level? What is the accuracy at an SKU store level? That is the lowest level that you can go to. And typically you will see that the lower down you go, the accuracy is also going to drop. So my sense is in companies, you can't fix a number. I think this comes more with experience, with qualitative discussions, and with quantitative systems, and with maturity. Okay. And again, these are discussions where I would rather work on a range. Okay. Now, can I look at, to begin with, 70 to 75% accuracy range at an aggregate level. Okay. Then once we dig deeper, we'll have to understand the causal factors and reasons for dip in accuracy. So I cannot tell you for industry A, this is the range, and say auto industry, this is the range, or pharma, this is the range, because even companies within the pharma industry or within the auto space or within retail or within e-commerce will have their own, different benchmarks. Correct? So my sense is look at it from an industry perspective, from a product perspective, complexity perspective, the SKU mix, okay, and what sort of metrics you're using to measure the accuracy levels. And to begin with, at a broad level, at a strategic level, okay, at a broad business level, what is your working range? So I cannot really give you a precise answer here. My sense would be, think of the answer along the lines that I told you. I think that will give you a better appreciation of the role of forecast metrics and forecast accuracy. I hope that answer helped.
Absolutely, sir. So I'm just going to take a follow-up question to that. In fact, there are two questions to follow up on that. By one person called as Mr. Sandeep Kumar. So he says that what type of planning can improve the OTD on-time delivery from 25% to 80%, considering 40 to 50% forecast accuracy on product level? And as a second question, he says is what should be the benchmarking OTD for electronics manufacturing industry?
I think a very long question actually, but I'll take the last part first. I think, see, for any industry, not only electronics, I think the on-time delivery benchmark is again function of your own internal lead times and cycle times, and the time for which the customer is willing to wait, right? So it is an addition of all these, correct? Now somewhere you can crash your internal lead times, right? Through operations excellence tools, through crashing of internal lead times, okay, through industrial engineering, etc. But there's only so much you can do, correct? You can bring your lead time to virtually zero, correct? Now suppose there are different touch points in an order, okay, the order processing time plus the conversion time plus the transportation lead time in the electronics industry. Now can you think of learning from some other industries where some products are not forecasted, they are put on an auto distribution mode, okay, where there is a science and there is a daily distribution plan for certain products. So that means there what happens is you are keeping some buffer stock in the chain, which means that doesn't have to be produced. So the production lead time is crashed. So now the net lead time is only the order processing time, which can be reduced to a few hours or days, and the transportation lead time. So your reaction time to a customer is equal to transportation lead time. This is the most ideal lean and TOC theory which I told you. It is practically possible. But again, are all your partners aligned? Are your suppliers aligned? Okay, and are you in a position to isolate or segregate certain products which can come on this auto mode? But otherwise, if it is the traditional method of importing materials, then converting them, keeping assemblies ready, or working in the make to order or assemble to order situation, and then waiting for the customer order and then reacting, then I think you are going to have those inherent design lead times, right, which you are not going to be able to crash, correct? So my sense is it is again a function of the geographic location of your last mile customer or consumer, whether it's a regional distribution center, whether it is an electronic store, or whether it's a mall. But all I can tell you is, if you heard my previous answers carefully, I think there is a classic case to apply demand planning principles and relook at your push-pull system, correct? Now coming to the OTIF, I think again I have seen, even in my experience, I think even a 1 or 2% increase in OTIF levels doesn't generally merit the amount of investment and the people that you put into the system, right? Now suppose you're already operating at again an acceptable range. See, why I will say an OTIF number is good. If I have minimum loss of sales, if most of my high selling products are largely available across all my selling points, okay, then I will say any level of OTIF is acceptable to me. But despite having 100% OTIF, if my products are lying in the wrong place, wrong channel, and I was not able to sell them, then what is the point? So again, my sense would be, instead of pinpointing a number or assimilating these factors into what caused an OTIF increase, I think it is better to again have a regional a very rational assessment of your OTIF percentages, and then monitor it more in terms of the actual end consumer or the last mile fill rates. Okay, so if that part is doing well, that means all elements of the preceding chain are also doing well. But if there is a problem, then you'll have to pinpoint your finger and do a root cause analysis. That is it due to lack of raw material availability? Is it due to production delay? Is it due to transportation delay? Is that impacting my OTIF? So you'll have to go back and do the fishbone herringbone diagram, which I have done in my past, and do a 5 eyes and try and see how I can improve my OTIF. But is always improving an OTIF going to give you the desired benefits? My answer is no, because I have seen companies which are struggling to move from 90% to 92%, and they are spending, you know, lot of time, resources, energy, etc. But to get that additional 2-3% increase, is it worthwhile? I think that's a question you have to answer.
Great answer, sir. So I'll move on to the next question. This is by squadron leader Mr. Vijay Kumar. So he says that training is also an important part in any change in technology, especially with the end person. So who should be empowered with these tools?
The training tools?
Yes.
Okay. I think it's a very valid point, because even in my journey and, you know, even in my career, I think what I felt was, if this part is not done properly, I think, you know, the entire end objectives or the outcome of any such implementation initiatives, you know, will really not be that effective. Because, you know, these are all, I would say, again, soft skills, and no easy answers here again. But I think if you ask me in terms of who should be empowered, I think it has to be, you know, the user teams and the relevant functional heads. Okay, because the person who is going to use that particular tool, now whether he's a planner who is sitting at a central warehouse or a distribution center or a plant or a regional office or a head office, first of all, he has to be empowered with, you know, all the tools and, you know, all the supporting manuals, and he should have a complete understanding of the entire tool in its entirety, correct, and all the nuances. Then he has to act as the central point so that he can disseminate that knowledge to his team. Okay, and then they act as champions. So it works like a tree, okay, with deep rooted branches. Okay, because the executives cannot do it, right? It has to be the functional heads who take up the ownership, and then gradually they have to then spread the knowledge in a sequential step-by-step manner with a proper training plan and with your technology partner. The best way, I think, my sense is, for it to be effective, I think it should be done by both parties together, so that the understanding is the same, and, you know, all the intricacies and nuances of using a new tool or a software or a technique are understood, you know, uniformly across the team, across the functional team. Now, whether it is a distribution planning team, whether it is a, you know, the product planning team, whether it is a demand planning team or the production planning team, I think the onus lies with the functional head and then his team, and then they can slowly spread this knowledge to the entire organization. I think I would adopt that approach, and I think, to my mind, it is pretty effective.
Thank you so much, sir. So we'll have last three questions. The third last is from Mr. Sanjay Kadam. Considering VUCA and forecast inaccuracies given, will analysis and scenario building will take center stage? Do you see that? Do you foresee that change coming soon on organization levels all across?
Absolutely. I think again, it, you know, depends on your technology partner, vendor, and service provider, and the need for using, you know, what if or scenario tools, you know, which are essentially not very complicated tools. I'm not saying that, you know, you have to think of, you know, something so complex that nobody understands in the organization. Again, if you have heard what I said during my conversation with Ravi, I did allude to this fact 2-3 times. It is about, you know, translating, you know, your operational decisions and inputs in quantities into financial outcomes and goals, correct? Now, as long as you're able to establish this connect, okay, and you're able to see beforehand, okay, that what if this product is not available, what if there is an excess, what if there is a shortage, okay, what will be the impact on that particular sales channel, okay, what will be the impact on that key account, what will be the impact on that particular market or region, what will be the impact on that product, the family, and the brand. So as a planner, if you're able to establish this connect, I think half the battle is won. Okay, in very simple terms, if you have to explain to a layman, this is what I will do. And again, now what if and scenario analysis does not have to be done for the sake of doing it. Now, many companies have felt that there are service providers, there are technology partners in the market there who can help you. And why not extend that building block also to your forecasting suite or your demand planning suite, correct? So that you have this option of doing a scenario based planning. What if this happens? What if there is a, you know, supply disruption? Okay, what if some untoward incident happens? What if I can model some risk variables into my, you know, planning paradigm? So you will be in a better position to at least preempt and foresee if something can go wrong, correct? So my sense is definitely yes, if modern planning tools can, you know, be done along with, you know, these, you know, flexible what if and, you know, scenario analysis and, you know, with risk factors, I think that will be a very, very good starting point, at least to, you know, generate a robust aggregate demand and supply plan. I'm not even getting into the details, at least at a broad level. Do I know whether my supply can largely meet my demand? So I think definitely agree with you. And, you know, there is a important role that these tools can play. in my opinion.
All right. So we'll go to the next question from Mr. Anup Upasni. What is the possibility of material planning, scheduling jobs been replaced by technology AI like some other IT jobs recently?
Okay, I think he's referring to the risk of job loss because of AI and ML and all coming into the picture. So all I can tell you is that I think I'm pretty much in the same boat, right? We are all a larger family of practitioners. So I think these apprehensions are bound to be there, and my only sense is that there are organizations, and I have said this during one of my previous presentations a few months ago also. So there are companies which are building supply chain organization structures where there is a in-house data science team, okay, and which is drawn up from within the company only, okay, or external help is also sought. And these data science teams are working very closely with the supply chain functional teams or the operation teams, okay, to actually design tools and techniques in-house. For want of time, I didn't want to discuss this when I was answering because I thought that it would have become too long, but I think this is the time for me to bring that out. I think you will appreciate the fact that, see, there is no risk for any job. I think it is there is a need for enough people out there, for people who understand the tools and technologies and the algorithms, but there is also a need for people who understand the business domain, okay, the pain points, the process realities, the customer complaints, the market related issues. So if these can be translated into a suitable model, I think that is when the situation will become most ideal. That is, you have functional and operational supply chain teams working closely with data science teams, okay, in a center of excellence sort of an organization structure to create tools and techniques for the internal user organization. So why can't you have a captive center of excellence, business analytics center of excellence, okay, supply chain and data science center of excellence? So here nobody is going to lose a job, right? You can envision a scenario where everybody has a role to play and it is becoming complementary and everybody is adding value. See, because today I don't think everybody can be a Superman, right, where you understand the business and the algorithms and the tools and the outcomes, etc. I think it is a holistic team effort. So my sense is, I think it's better to look at it from that front rather than getting bogged down by the potential risks of job impact and what it will have on future outcomes, etc. I would look at a complete redesign of the supply chain organization itself and bring in data science into it. That will be my answer.
Right. So let's go to the last question of the day, again by squadron leader Mr. Vijay Kumar. So is this interdepartmental communications and continuity training, especially in ERP functions, one of the reason for VUCA in any function?
Oh, that's a good one. I think ERP training has led to VUCA. I won't. I think look at it from that function. I think my sense is that it is about how these tools are used again. It is not about having an end-to-end ERP, or it is not about having a particular module in place. But I think it has to be seen in the the larger realm of the business realities and what is happening around in the market, external factors, right? For example, you have heard of the PESTEL model, right? Political, economic, social, technological, legal, environmental. Now, what are all these extraneous factors doing to the company business as a whole? Okay, so then you have to look outside in, correct? And then take these decisions on ERP tools and training, etc. They will come in later. But today, in a nutshell, what is the company plan? At least not 3 years, 5 years, at least in the next 1 year now. Given the fact that, of course, the GDP is going to look very good because we are going to grow on a very low base. Correct. But the fact remains that there are many other macroeconomic indicators which really don't add up. Correct. So in that light, now, how is your company or sector positioned? Okay, what are some calls you're going to take in terms of capacity investments? Okay, in terms of adding manpower, in terms of adding facilities, in terms of relooking at your supply chain function. I think then ERP comes in. But again, my answer is the same. I think we have to live with VUCA. We have to find a workaround and first of all understand that it is here to stay. We can't make it zero. At least I can't. If there's anyone out there who is willing to share that magic bullet with me in terms of how to nullify the effects of VUCA, I'll be happy to hear it from them. But my honest submission is that it really can't be done, right? And learning and training, I think, has to be a part of life for organizations. I think that should never stop. I think irrespective of whatever goes on, I think collaboration, knowledge sharing, and learning from one another, constant two-way flow of information. I think this is where it becomes enriching for the whole supply chain community and the ecosystem. So that will, that would be my, humble response to your question, sir.
Thank you so much, Sunil sir, for such wonderful answers. I'll just hand it over to Ravi sir once for just last few notes. You're on mute, Ravi sir.
Thank you so much, Sunil. There was a wonderful discussion, I think, and they were so interesting. We actually overshot a little. So I think let us. So I would request Nitin to give a vote of thanks, and after that we'll close the session.
Yeah. So thank you so much to both the speakers for finding out time on Saturday and doing this show. It was really great. I'm sure all the attenders enjoyed a lot. And to all the attenders, if you like this show, if you like this format, I request you to please spread the word among the community, among the supply chain community, so that we can have maximum viewers having insights and getting more and more knowledge. So just on the closing note, we have the next session on 10th of April, a topic which probably no one has covered till date, SCM challenges in Indian Air Force. And that will be taken up by a speaker from the Indian Air Force. So I'm sure it's going to be really, really interesting and something which we have never heard about. So please do join us during that session on 10th of April at 4 p.m. on the same link. Apart from that, if you want to connect with the trainers, I have with the speakers, sorry, I've already shared the LinkedIn link with you on the chat. If you want to connect with NoWorks, you can do that again through the social media. If there's anything that we can help you with, please do let us know. And once again, thank you everyone for joining in, tuning into the show. Have a great weekend ahead. See you again on 10th April. Thank you.
Thank you. Let us close the session now. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure being here. Thank you. Take care. Thank you, Ravi. Thank you, Nish.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.